Appreciate it.
And since we're talking about fatherhood, I would like to get into, how important do you think fatherhood is, and how vital do you think it is to be in young black boys and girls' lives?
So, great question. Fatherhood is a tricky situation because, it goes back to our tribal sense, back to Africa. It goes back to our time when the family and the tribes actually were together, and fathers meant a lot more. And yeah, sorry about that, fellas.
We in a community center right now, man. It's a very historic community center, so yeah, I might see some random audio in the background, but just ignore that. Like, you know what I mean? We gonna be good.
Yeah. No, we're here at the Major Owen Center, and that's part of fatherhood too, because that's been long standing for us to get a community base in the community where young people could come, especially fatherless young kids. But getting back to the father question, when I was younger, the fathers on the block took care of all of us. If you saw someone doing something wrong, as a young man, you didn't even need to talk to his parents. You handled him the same way you would handle your own child. And we had mad respect for fathers in the neighborhood. They went out every morning. They went out and got what they had to. They did the kill, brought that food home, brought that check home, brought in the existence for the family. And there was a big respect for that. And we've lost that along the way. It's troubling how some of that has come about. You have to go back in history to the 70s. You got to go back to child support situations. You got to go back to schools from the cradle to the grave to the jails. That's really the situation, and you have to unclasp that, right? You have to break that apart and understand the history of it before you talk about fatherhood, because fatherhood is a very strong word. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important what you said about just the community factor, because on this show, me and Jew, we'll talk about that, the lack of community. Like, Jew always brings up, growing up, we had that sense of community where, like you said, you could discipline him or whatever. You could look out for him if you see something going wrong with him. So we lost that, unfortunately, and I think we are slowly getting back to that, or at least I hope so. But when did you see the turn with black fathers? Because obviously we did have, at one point in America, black people were the most married in this country. Like, you know what I mean? And then it took a turn. When did you see it take a turn? And do you think that was systematic?
So, yeah, I believe, well, first of all, let me say this. Let me qualify this a bit. There are still a lot of fathers out here doing real father things. Unfortunately, there's a media push to show the black and Latino father as worthless, to show him as very out of control, to show that he has no emotional control. He does not know how to delay his gratification. He's always physical. He's always creating victims around him. And that narrative, I think, started a little bit towards the early 80s, because up until that point, we were really some outstanding young men coming up. At that time when I was... it was really the early 80s, because at that time what was called, and you can do your history on it, Reaganomics came into play. It was Ronald Reagan came in as the president. They started to get rid of all the assistance for schools, so BEOG and Pell Grant started to go away. His wife started with the Say No to Drugs, and so that's where brothers started getting incarcerated for minor offenses, man. When you look at it now, it's minor offenses, and some of them are still there for minor offenses. And so in the 80s is when you started to see that. And then you started to have brothers who were systematically being pulled out of the house because they were no longer in relationships with their children's mothers, and all of a sudden they found themselves in court. I mean, it's okay to be responsible for your children, and you have to be, you should be. But once the court system gets involved, it drags you through a maze of physical trauma. It's an emotional drama. It's financially draining. And so I think a lot of brothers just did not have the where to. And so they started to basically hide out. They started to leave their jobs and take jobs off the books so that they wouldn't have to pay. And that really started the whole downfall, I think, of the young black male, especially in New York State. I can't speak for other states, but I can speak for New York State because I've been here all this time, and I think that's what happened. And so, yeah.
I mean, even right now, I think statistically they say that, you know, 70% or I know it's a higher percentage of black fathers in the house over any other race or group. So
Most involved.
yeah,
Yeah.
and making change. So